Welcome, sir.
The next is about udakavaha slotas, and the udakavaha slotas. The word udaka as such, as a content of the body, is described very well in Vagbhata Sangraha as such. Dravastu tad atiyogena तत्तदतियोगेन चमानं पुरुषम् अनुबध्नाति तथा मूत्रं रुधिरं अन्यांश शरीरे धातून् यच्च सर्वशरीरगतं बाह्यात्वं बिभर्ति तत् यच्च त्वगन्तरे गुणगतं लसिकाशुद्धवाच्यं यच्च ऊष्मानुबद्धं रोमकूपेभ्यः अभिनिष्पत्तत्वेदवाच्यं तदुदकं. The udaka in the body, the water content in the body is present in many compartments, and it's regulated. The flow of that is regulated by the discharges through the urine, feces. That's chamanam purisham anubhavnati. Purisha, the feces is one of the regulatory factors, and urine as well as the other metabolic functions of the body would regulate this. And the whole fluid is contained within the bag of skin. The whole body, the skin acts as the tvaka acts as this bag for that, and the fluid which is present just in the subcutaneous area is called as lasika, and when the same is excreted through the skin in the form of sweat, it's called as sweda. In between you have the other body fluids which are of their different functions. त्वक् प्रसादात् रक्तस्य प्रदाः उदकधरा त्वक् तासाम् उदकधरा च आद्या. Now Vagbhata gives a very specific this anatomical entity called as udakadhara kala, which is just below the twak as such. Whereas in the other samhitas also it's a similar issue, and yat drava rasa manda snigdam rudupichilam rasa rudira vasa kapapitamutra sweda raso rasanam cha. The water content in charaka mentioned is also the similar issue, where all that fluid contents of the body which could be presented in named as rasa, rudira, vasa, etc., they are all the specialities. Sushruta gives a very specific description of udakavaha slotas. Udakavaha nam slotasam taluhu moolam klomacha pradushyanam cha kalvesham idam vishesha vijnanam bhavati tadyada jihva talu hosta kanta kloma shosham pipasa cha adipravrutam drishtva udakavahanyasa sotam cha pradushyani iti vidyata. Udakavaha slotas, again the anatomical entities are described in the form of kalumula and kloma. Now we will not go into that level where the anatomically describe what is kloma and as such. Kalumula, of course, palate is where you get the sensation of the thirst as such. Kloma, whether it is really kidney or something else, that's the issue of controversy. We will not go into that part now, because Sushruta might not have considered the basic principles of the current anatomy. The way the issue is described is something different. So it may be related to the kidney structures as a whole. The functionality of the kidney, kloma function, could be related to the functionality of the kidney. And whenever the udakavaha slotas is affected, it can produce a dryness in the mouth, excess of thirst, or the other clinical symptoms related to that. Then the slotas doesn't mean only a cavity. That's the important issue. There could be innumerable channels through the fluid would flow, or contents would be flowing, and this is described in Charaka as a Indriya Pranavahanja Slotansi Surimeva Gabhastaya Samshitani Bastistu Sulabudam Udaka Sevani Shukra Mutra Vahini Nadina Madhe Mutradharo Ambuhanam Sarosam Udadhiriva Apaganam Pratishta. The Udakavaha slotas in Charaka is related more to the basti. Basti is again urinary tract as a whole, not the bladder alone. And the channels which are connecting that udakavaha slotas are very fine, and they are not really anatomically identifiable, where the dimensions can be measured, and their dimensions are compared to the sunlight, rays of sunlight they are extremely fine and they are not visible to the naked eye. Similarly, the all the sources, the fine sources in the body, they are arranged in very fine manner, maybe microscopic manner, this entity, and they are related to each organ of the body. And when it comes to the udakavaha srotas is mainly connected to the basti. Basti is the whole of the urinary tract, as well as स्थूलगुद मुष्कसेवनी मूत्रवाहिनी नाम मध्ये. The structures which are very close to that urinary tract are the rectum, the scrotum, etc. And it's something like it's compared to the sea, which is connected to all the other water sources of the body. Now, from the current physiology point of view, the regulation of the fluid content in the body is mainly by the simple gross mechanism of the thirst, which makes the body to receive water. So sensation of the thirst is one of the most important issue by which the fluid intake is regulated, and this is done by regulated by the different organs. The mouth, which is the area where you will have the sensation of the thirst, it's induced by the brain regions mainly. Either it could be by the circadian rhythm, like spontaneously there would be some situation where you will feel thirsty, or the sentence would be affected by or controlled by the control of the circulatory system, where the blood osmolarity, volume of the blood pressure and sodium levels would impact through the different mechanisms. Or in the kidney, the hormone angiotensin 1 and 2, when it is used, it also facilitates the stimulation of the nerve centers, the thirst centers, and that makes the hypothalamus to get activated, resulting in a sensation of the whenever there is a variation in the heart rate or change in the kidney function, you will have that sensation of the thirst, and that would be resulting in fluid consumption. Fluid in the body is again mainly the water content would be the major portion of the body. More than 60% of the male body and average around 50% of the female body is having the fluid water as its content. The solid particles are only 40% in male and around 50% in the females. And this fluid again is categorized into or is present in the body in three compartments: intracellular compartment, which is around 33%, and the interstitial or intercellular in between the fluid, that's outside the circulatory system, is around 21.5%. Plasma is around 4.5%. Slightly the percentage may vary in females than the males. In the females, intracellular fluid would be around 27%, whereas it's 32% in the males. This is just slight variation in the male and female. Of course, the other way, females have more solid body than the solid contents than the males as such. That's the other part. Now, solid components which are present there are either proteins, which are the major components, lipids, minerals, carbohydrates, and some other crystals are the solid components. The amount of water, source of water gains and losses when the fluid is in fluid balance, that the fluid intake and fluid output being same is maintained by different mechanism. And whenever we say a healthy balance, healthy situation is intake and the output should be equal. And the intake and output sources are, the sources of intake are mainly the water content of the food, as a water consumed as a liquid as such, and a good amount of water is produced within the body when there is a metabolic activity. When glucose molecule is broken down, there would be 6 molecules of water produced for each, and this also would add to the water content of the body, but that constitutes around this quantity is just arbitrary, around 300 ml is added every day, and average of 1200 ml and average of 1000 ml of fluid is consumed in the form of either liquid or the food as such. Excretion would be again comparably urination around 1200, evaporation of skin around 750 ml, evaporation from the lungs is these are invisible perspiration, and loss in feces. It maintains a balance. Of course, these volumes will be significantly variable. When we say this 1000 ml or 1200 ml, that doesn't mean that it is absolutely same. It can vary significantly depending upon multiple factors, and whatever the figure is given is just an average. Now, the retention of the fluid or water in the body is dependent upon the electrolytes. If there will be no electrolytes, the water will be just soaking away, it will just flow away. Now, in which compartment the water has to be retained and how much of the water is to be retained is decided mainly by the electrolytes as well as the other factors. And the electrolytes, the difference between the concentration of the electrolytes in between these compartments would be making the differences as such. Among the electrolytes, the most important electrolytes are sodium, potassium, calcium and magnesium. These are the most important electrolytes which keep the water content and the functionality, physiological functions of the water content in these compartments specific, unique as such. The sodium content in the extracellular compartment, that's plasma and the interstitial fluid, is comparatively high, 142 and 139 in interstitial fluid level. Chloride content also is higher in the extracellular compartment, whereas in the extracellular compartment, the intracellular compartment, sodium content is comparatively low, whereas the intracellular compartment has very high levels of potassium and comparatively low levels of in the extracellular compartment, plasma as well as interstitial fluid, the potassium level is just 4. Now, the major two ions which make these differences are sodium chloride and potassium bicarbonate. Would be keeping these fluid in their specific compartments and regulate the fluid exchange of the fluid from intercellular and extracellular compartment. Though we may say that extracellular intracellular compartment word, they do not really mean an absolutely watertight compartment. Instead, there is a continuous exchange of the fluid there, and this continuous exchange of the fluid is regulated by mainly the sodium and potassium ranges, differences as such. As far as the other these ions are concerned, calcium content in intracellular fluid is very low, nearly zero, except in a few muscles. Like otherwise, in the other cells, almost calcium content in the intracellular compartment is lower. Whereas in the plasma and extracellular interstitial area, it's around 1.3 to 1.2 percentage as such. Whereas the proteins which form actually semi-permeable conduit, or which act to the osmolar pressure of the water, the fluid there, they are mainly present in the intracellular compartment at a higher concentration than that of the extracellular compartment. Now, the fluid is exchanged from the extracellular to the intracellular compartment by different mechanisms, and these mechanisms are either it could be diffusion, or it could be facilitated diffusion, or it could be active transport. Diffusion means when there is a difference in the concentration across when the osmolarity of the fluid at one side of the cell is more, there would be an attempt for balancing without using the energy of the body, and this is a passive flow, that's the diffusion. Whereas a facilitated diffusion is when that diffusion is facilitated by the active maintenance of the difference in the concentration, as in case of that sodium and potassium, sodium being extracellular and the potassium being intracellular, because this is maintained by the active utilization of the energy by the cell membrane, and then the fluid is exchanged out as such. Active is when there is an absolute absorption with a specific mechanism, either by the utilization of the energy again, where either the fluid is absorbed in or whether the fluid is excreted out. Electrolytes are absorbed or excreted out, would be the active transport mechanism. Now, the energy is required for both facilitated as well as active transport, whereas diffusion occurs as a passive process which doesn't require an energy. And the diffusion is just to attempt to keep the concentration equal across, whereas the facilitated diffusion and ATPs, they are trying to keep the concentration different, a range would be present in between across the membrane, and this is the real mechanism as such. Now, the basic issues are fluid compartments are separated by membranes that are freely permeable to water. So, diffusion can occur freely, whereas the fluid is regulated. The fluid is regulated by the hydrostatic pressure. Hydrostatic pressure is a pressure exerted by the heart pumping mechanism, where the pressure of the systole would be pushing the water contents at the arterial end of the capillaries. As well, then the fluid, the amount of the fluid which goes through would be decided by the capillary pore size. Moreover, which of the substances can move across into the interstitial space also is decided by the pore size. Proteinous materials are substances which have a higher molecular size or higher molecular weight do not pass through across the capillaries, and hence at the venous end of the capillaries there would be higher concentration, and that higher concentration would be producing an osmotic pressure, and due to that osmotic pressure fluid will be reabsorbed. Fluid will be reabsorbed as such, and that's the two important activities: hydrostatic pressure exerted by the heart and osmotic pressure exerted at the venous end of the capillaries. These are the two important factors which help in exchange of the fluid from the interstitial compartment, this extracellular compartment to the interstitial compartment, or vice versa, interstitial to the plasma level. The other factors which decide also are the capillary filtration pressure, capillary colloid osmotic pressure, interstitial hydrostatic pressure. These are, and the tissue colloid osmotic pressure are regulated by these mechanisms of maintenance of hydrostatic and the osmotic pressure. The same is illustrated like at the arterial side, hydrostatic pressure pushes the fluid out, and the amount of this in the venous side, the osmotic pressure sucks the fluid in. When if these two are equal, there would be no residual fluid, but most of the times there may not be an equality, some difference is there, and because of that some differences, if there is any fluid left over in the interstitial compartment, that fluid is taken up by the lymphatic drainage, and lymphatic drainage acts as an accessory to this flow. The hydrostatic pressure is higher at the arterial end, whereas hydrostatic pressure would be negative at the venous end, whereas the osmotic pressure tends to increase at the arterial end, at the venous end, and it will be lower at the venous end as such. Now, the when there is a exchange of water across the extracellular and intracellular fluid, now the osmotic pressure and hydrostatic pressure, they facilitate and regulate the fluid exchange at the interstitial space, from the plasma to the interstitial space. But the fluid will be exchanged at the interstitial fluid with the intracellular fluid. Now, intracellular and extracellular fluid have to maintain an balance as such. Suppose if there would be no activity, then the concentration of electrolytes would be the same, and of course in a normal situation the fluid is maintained as such. Suppose if there is a loss of water or lesser water in the extracellular compartment, that results in a comparatively low flow of fluid from the intracellular compartment to the extracellular compartment, resulting in the depletion as such. Decreased intracellular fluid volume also would be resulted. So because of that a continuous attempt to maintain the balance. Or the reverse also would occur if there is more of water in the interstitial compartment. The intracellular compartment also would be increasing the water contents as such. So when there is a deficit of water in the intracellular compartment or intercellular compartment, we call it as a dehydration. Now, dehydration can produce some changes in the cells. When the quantity of water within the intracellular compartment is lesser, we say that it is dehydration, and the changes which occur would be depending upon how much of this difference would be. Like if it is less than 2%, then there would be just thermoregulatory activity will be lesser. that the cells would not be able to sense the changes in the temperature. So sweating action may be slightly reduced as such. If the percentage of the fluid is 3%, then the muscular endurance time, that time taken for the muscles to get activated as well as the muscles to get remain contracted, would be reduced as such. When the percentage is in between 4 to 6%, the muscular strength is reduced and reduced time would be there, and there could be even heat cramps. The patients would be experience the cramps as such. When the level of fluid or the reduction of the fluid is around more than 4% or more than 6%, then there could be severe heat cramps, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, or even death can occur. So the maximum range of the fluid change or dehydration within the intracellular compartment, which can be coped up and which can make you viable, survive, would be around less than 6%. If the deficit of water in the intracellular compartment is more than 6%, it can be fatal as such. Now, the normal body hourly fluid requirement by the body would be again varying depending upon multiple factors like the temperature, the humidity in environment, as well as the other physiological activity of the body. But on an average, based upon considering that something of a standard temperature conditions and temperature these body conditions, the average requirement of the water in the to maintain that normal osmotic activity in the body is again related to the body weight. When the body weight is 5 kgs in children, it's around 20 milliliter per hour, whereas the body weight is 90 kg, is around 110 ml per hour. Again, this requirement also would be varying depending upon multiple factors. When the external temperature is more, naturally the water requirement will be more. When the humidity in the external environment is lesser, the water content requirement also will be more. When you do more exercise, the exertion, that also requires more water. So whenever we say about these quantities are not very rigid quantities, but average amount of water which is required by the body. Now, if there is a lesser amount of the fluid in any compartment, any tissue as such, it could be in the muscles or any other cells, the body would be, there would be a synchronized response by the body. That it's not that only one compartment or one tissue response. If there is a reduction of water in one tissue, the other whole of the body would respond, and that response is trying to maintain the balance, and that mechanism is called as homeostasis. That homeostasis is mainly by the chemoreceptors which are present in the body of aorta, and when the chemoreceptors are stimulated, they will stimulate the ADH secretion at the thalamus, pituitary as such, and that will be resulting in two aspects. The thirst sensation will be increased and the amount of the urinary fluid will be lesser, urinary excretion will be lesser. There will be more of water reabsorbed in the distal convoluted tubule, so that there will be additional water added to the body, and hence there will be no abnormality. Homeostasis is established. That's if there is a temporary, when you are taking the amount of water taken is not exactly 20 ml per hour, or if that gap is more, or if there is a slight variation in the physiological activity, when you do exert more, there could be a temporary more fluid loss from a group of muscles, but that doesn't result in a dehydration because the homeostatic mechanisms will take up and they can maintain that. Suppose the deficit is beyond the capacity of this homeostatic mechanism, the tolerance limits of the body, chemoreceptors and ADH is not able to cope up with the loss of the fluid, then there would be a real dehydration condition. Dehydration also could occur if the osmoreceptors are not affected, ADH is not affected, then that could be resulting in a dehydration as such. That kind of a dehydration is what is called as a trishna vyadhi. So udakavaha srotas, where it results in dehydration, results in trishna vyadhi, and that trishna the causes of the trishna vyadhi mentioned by Charaka. That's the important. Trishna, though the word meaning is thirst, I would not translate Trishna Vyadhi as thirst. Trishna Vyadhi is a mechanism or a situation where the homeostatic mechanisms have failed and there is a uncontrolled or a pathological thirst produced, and that's exactly what we call as the dehydration, which requires some interventions. And the causes for that could be Kshobat, Bhayat, Shramadapi, Shokat, Krodhat, Vilanganat, Madhyat, Kshara, Amla, Lavana, Katuka, Ushna, Ruksha, Shushkana, Sevabhi, Dhatukshaya, Gadakarshana, Vamanadi, Atiyoga, Surya, Santapehi, Pittanilo, Prodho, Somyan, Dhatum, Shoshayataha, Rasavahinish, Nil, Nadihi, Jihva Mula, Galatalu, Klomnaha, Samshoshya, Nranam Dehe, Kurdas, Krishnam, Mahabalo, Eto, पीतम पीतम हि जलम शोषयतस्तावतो न याति शमं घोरव्याधिकृशयानां प्रभवति उपसर्गभूता सा. Now, the Trishna Vyadhi, dehydration, could be produced to either physical activities, emotional disturbances, could be related to the type of the food you consume, or it also could occur due to metabolic conditions like Dhatukshaya or Gadakarshana. Gadakarshana is due to other diseases which are present, or they also can occur due to exaggerated physiological responses like Vamana or Adhisara, excess of vomiting or excess of discharge acid, which would affect the Rasavahini structures, the structures of Rasavahinis, the fluid compartment, the intraplasma compartment of the body, and that results in the further aggravation of the Jihva Mula Galatalu Klomaha, the structures, other related structures, maybe kidney, hypothalamus, pituitary, and so on, may be affected, which result in the impairment of the strength of the body, so that, and hence the patient person would not be feeling satisfied even if he takes water, and it also can occur due to the other disease of Upasargabhutaha. The signs of dehydration, that Trishna, signs of dehydration would be when there is excess of fluid loss, the patient would have, and the causes of dehydration could be excess of sweating or vomiting or diarrhea or the fluid loss due to burns or after surgery, polyuria where the urine is excreted more, or inadequate intake, the person is not able to take water as such. And these could occur due to multiple disease conditions, underlying disease conditions like high fever, a hot climate, or conditions like cystic fibrosis may result in excess of sweating, and this can result in the dehydration. Acute diarrhea, which could be produced due to multiple causes, vomiting, which could be produced due to multiple causes, also can result in the dehydration. The signs of dehydration, particularly in pediatric cases, would be this sunken fontanelle. It is true only in the pediatric cases. In adults, you will not expect that fontanelle to be sunken because there will be fusion of the bones. Then the others, of course, reduced level of consciousness, a dry mucous membrane, reduced tissue turgor, elasticity of the tissue would be lesser, the rate of respiration would be increased, rate of heart contractions also would be increased, there is a tendency for the BP to reduce, and the peripheral blood vessels will be constricted, which results in even that relatively lower temperature of the periphery. The capillary refill time also will be lesser, and the most important will be oliguria, the total amount of urine excreted will be lesser. In pediatric condition, the assessment of the body weight also is one of the important criteria to decide about the dehydration as well as plan for the hydration. Now, the dehydration again is categorized into mild, moderate, and severe as such. And the mild is when the child is alert and capillary refilling time is within 2 seconds. Mucous membrane seem to be normal, tears are normal, heart rate is slightly increased but not very high, respiratory system is pattern normal, blood pressure is normal, urine output may be slightly reduced, skin turgor, everything is normal, then we call it as a mild dehydration. When moderate dehydration is when the child is lethargic, capillary refilling time is around more than 2 seconds but less than 4 seconds, mucous membrane seem to be dry, heart rate is increased remarkably, and respiratory rate also is increased dramatically. Blood pressure may be normal, but there could be orthostasis. Orthostasis in the sense, in the erect posture, the blood pressure may get reduced more, whereas in lying down posture, it may be normal. Pulse may be, volume of the pulse may be lesser. Skin turgor, that elasticity of the skin may be comparatively slow, and the skin may just come down to the normal level after a delayed the timing. Fontanelle may be depressed, that's as I said, mainly in a child. Sunken eyeballs, whereas severe dehydration, the child is obtunded, the semi-conscious, not responding to the stimuli properly. Capillary fill time would be more than 4 seconds. Limbs will be very cold. Membranes will be dry and cracked. Tears are absent. Heart rate is very much increased. Respiratory rate also is very much increased. Blood pressure is decreased. Pulse is faint or impalpable. Skin, as you lift up, it may remain in the tented position. Fontanelle or sunken, oliguria or anuria could be the presentation. One of the usual criteria in pediatric practice, again, these are all the important issues in the pediatric practice, to confirm about the dehydration is the urine color chart. Urine color is one of the simple factor by which the dehydration can be assessed. The normal urine color is a somewhat low yellowish color. As the urine becomes concentrated, the color will be increased, and darker the urine, the more the dehydration. And early evidence of dehydration is in children, particularly this is in children, can be made out by the urine color. Even in adults this is true, but in children it's quite important. And based upon that, the severe consequences of the dehydration can be prevented. This can be a simple guideline for anyone. In infants and children, changes in the body weight also are one of the important issues. And if the body weight is less than or reduced by 5% in infant, the loss of the fluid is around 50 milliliter per kg. If the weight loss is more than 10% of the original body weight, it's 100 ml. Severe dehydration, 100 and where the body weight loss is 15%. Whereas in children around up to around 10 years of age or weighing around 10 kg, the percentage is 3%, 6%, 9%. Whereas the body weight percentage may not be so conspicuous in adults, as the patient's body weight is around more than 50. These changes of the weight change may not be so much evident, and you cannot just calculate the fluid requirement of the body. Whereas in infants and children weighing less than 10 kg or around 10 kg, we can make out the amount of the fluid required by the body by assessing the body weight and comparing it to the others. Now, all these clinical symptoms of the dehydration are exactly what's mentioned in the Kapaja Trishna. Kapaja Trishna Lakshana are Kapavtabhyam Anila Analabhyo Kapo Api Shushka Prakuroti Trishnam Nidra Gurutvam Madhura Srithatadaya Ardhita Shushati Jati Matam Kanto Lepo Mukhapichilarpam Shita Dvaraha Chardhihe Arochakascha Kapatmikayam Gurugatratata Shakha Sushopasto Vibhakayava Etani Rupani Bhavanti Tasyam Daya Ardhita Kamshati Nati Jambaha. These are exactly the clinical features of the dehydration, and in Charaka also the same is described. Deho Rasajo Ambuho Rasash Rasakshayat Trushet Dinaswaraha Pratamiam Samsukasvegal Raguhu. Now, assessment of the dehydration is one of the important issues, and it is mainly assessed and management is also done. If there is no evidence of dehydration, you don't do anything. If there is a mild dehydration, then rehydrated with the ORS of 50 ml per kilogram body weight around 4 hours and replace ongoing losses. Diet has to be given as per the standard. If there is a moderate dehydration, 5 to 10% in a child, now all these are very critical in pediatric practice. In adults also they are true, but slight relaxation may be possible in adults. If the dehydration is around 5 to 10% in a child, oral dehydration of 100 ml per kilogram over 4 hours has to be given, and if there is a continuous further loss, that has to be again managed with oral fluid only. But if the concentration of the dehydration is more than 10%, body weight loss is more than this 10% as such, then intravenous resuscitation with the normal saline or reverse lactate is necessary. IV fluid would be absolutely necessary. And if there is a continuous fluid loss, that has to be compensated. Oral replacement can be given only after the child has become stable, and this is the general protocol of treating these dehydrations in pediatric practice. ORS or oral rehydration solutions are of two categories: WHO or UNICEF ORS, and the osmolarities are particularly and very popularly used now are sodium chloride 2.6 grams per liter, and it gives around 75 molarity of the sodium, and this is the standard, whereas the other type of the ORS is not generally given. This is considered to be the standard ORS suggested by WHO and UNICEF. And potassium chloride is 1.5 grams per liter, glucose is anhydrous 13.5 grams per liter. So around 20.5% grams per liter would be the solid contents, which gives an osmolarity of 245. And the dehydration by weight is, if particularly if at all you have to give it by IV fluids, these quantities are absolutely essential. Whereas in oral also the same is true. If the body weight is around 5 kg, the total quantity of the fluid should be given only 150 milliliters per hour. That's the maximum limit. And this has to be given by oral route, 150 milliliters per hour. Whereas if the body weight is 100 kg, then it can be given 3000 milliliters or 3 liters per hour. So when you give the water to the dehydrated patient, that rate of fluid replacement also is one of the important criteria. Very critical in children. In pediatric practice, the rate of infusion, rate of fluid replacement is very critical, whereas in adults it's not critical. But if you give excess of fluid, much more than what is required, that also can result in more complications, which can result in what we call as overhydration. So overhydration is one of the major complications of treating the cases of dehydration, and the overhydration again can occur as hyperosmolar, isoosmolar or hyposmolar. Hyperosmolar is when you give more concentrated fluid, the ORS with a higher the osmolarity. If the fluid is replaced with a higher osmolar fluid than the standard ORS, the standard ORS would have 245 millimoles the molarity. Instead of that, if you give a more concentrated fluid and in excess, that can result in both increase in extracellular and intracellular compartment, and that results in edema of the cells. If you give isoosmolar, comparatively it's safer. There may not be any severe changes in the body, but still the whole total water content of the body would be increased. If you give a hypoosmolar, then the hypoosmolar fluid would be resulting in depletion of the electrolytes from the intracellular compartment, which can produce more serious complications. And so hence, if you give a plain water in a child with the dehydration without that electrolytes, that can result in more severe complication. If you give a fluid which is more concentrated than the standard, the 245 millimoles, again that can result in complications. So ideally the molarity of or the osmolarity of the fluid which you give for as a replacement is an important issue. If you give a hypertonic solution, the cells will shrunken and the cells will be broken down, RBCs will be broken down. Whereas if it is a hypotonic, the cells will become mediumatous, and that also result in breaking down as such. Isotonic, the cells will remain normal. So overhydration, mainly the causes are if there is the uncontrolled IV therapy. Renal failure also can result in isotonic overhydration, and if the patient is on long-term corticosteroid therapy, that also result in isotonic overhydration. Hypertonic overhydration, if there is excess of sodium ingestion or rapid infusion of hypertonic saline, also can result in overhydration, and that results in the severe electrolyte imbalances, and this is and result in hypernatremia. The potassium concentration could be raised, even that can result in the major complications as it. That's about the water balance or udakavaha source is a primary issue. The consequent next part would be the electrolyte changes, which also are related to that, which we will discuss in the coming session, like the sodium and potassium abnormalities. So we will conclude today. If there are any questions, okay, there are no questions, so we will stop at that.